Hello, everybody, and welcome to Know Your Shit podcast, where our knowledge and pride in what we do drives us to be excellent. My name is Josh Cadillac, and once again, I'll be in the driver's seat for today's show as we learn how to stop just chasing paychecks and start closing customers for life. And the way that we do that here is we interview some of the most successful people in all kinds of different industries to see how they achieve the success that they have. We have a great show for you today because we have a great guest. And our guest today is Mr. Tim Shields. Tim, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, it's a pleasure. It's great to talk to you.
So, Tim, why don't you tell everybody what it is that you do?
Well, I am a writer, author, literary collaborator. I decided I wanted to be a writer at 17. Three things happened. One, I started keeping a journal. Two, I took maybe an accidental heroic dose of mushrooms at Grateful Dead concert. And three, I wanted to be a writer so bad, I started asking to be used as an instrument of peace. And I say the mushroom part like kind of jokingly, but also I really think it kind of rewired my brain a little bit in a different way, because it was like I kind of experienced this, what you might call unity consciousness. And, back then we were kind of partying, but obviously now today we know the medicinal values of, mushrooms and everything for PTSD and all that stuff. So um, I I had this experience and I was like, what is this? I want to understand how the universe works. What are we doing here? And I was just kind of I came out of college and I was chasing the dot-com bust and um, left New York, wound up in Seattle. And then around like 35, I was like, wow, I used to ask to be used as an instrument of peace. And then I wound up linking up with Dr. Joe Dispenza. Are you familiar with who he is?
No.
Okay, well, Dr. Joe Dispenza teaches meditation all over the world, but through the lens of like quantum physics, neuroscience, epigenetics, all this stuff. And I mean, he's probably the global thought leader on the mind, body, spirit, or energy connection. And his workshops sell out in like 5-10 minutes, 2,000 people. And he's kind of just teaching people to get beyond their body, their personality, and everything, and connect with what we would call, the quantum field. And people are healing themselves of stage 4 cancer, genetic disorders. I was just at this workshop last week in Orlando, and it's crazy. Like 4 or 5 people got out of a wheelchair and started walking. And it's really just, I was thinking about it this morning. I was on the tennis court. I probably shouldn't have been thinking about this, but, like all of the, the great sort of masters and sages, and they say like, the power is within. And what Joe is really doing is he's kind of blended science and mysticism with ancient knowledge. And, he's explaining how and why we are doing what we're doing in these meditations. And he's explaining it through quantum physics, neuroscience, like I said, epigenetics, and people have, people are having incredible results. I mean, some go there to create something new in their life. Some go to heal something. And, so I've kind of been on this path where I never could have imagined that, this is where my life would take me. I wanted to be a writer on my own, but I wound up, I have one book out, two coming out, but I've been a literary collaborator because my sort of strength is distilling this complex information for the masses. And I just finished a collaboration. We're still in editorial with another guy named Dr. Zach Bush, and he's one of the global thought leaders on our microbiome and how it relates to our soil systems. And his lab was kind of the first lab to detail the glyphosate injury across all of biology. And glyphosate is the poison that we're using in our pesticides and herbicides, and it's doing massive damage to biology, to plants, to it's like why we had chronic disease start hockey sticking in the 90s. It's like glyphosate is one molecule off of Agent Orange, which is what we used to obviously spray in Vietnam. And that's what we're putting in our food systems. But anyway, didn't mean to go into all those little diatribes.
No. All good. Where do you think the success has come from for you?
Well, my new work is called Dream Tethering. And I I define the dream as the memory of what the soul envisions for itself before it expresses human. And then tethering is the utmost limit or extent of which one can go in action, ability, or resources. So then, dream tethering for me is the transformational healing and creation process that is expressed in the pursuit, execution, realization of your greatest potential in its highest timeline, in its fullest expression. Now, if I had to break that down, it would come from determination, focused awareness, and a little bit being, because I've been tethered to this dream, I've kind of been guided by, outside sources, the universe, whatever you want to call it. Because I've tried to get off this writing train many times. Like when it got really hard, I'm like, screw this. I'm just going to go to Amazon. I'm going to make a ton of money, blah, blah, blah. And life was like, nope, you're going in this direction. And it was like the minute I finally totally committed to it, all of these doors started to open. So I think commitment is when you're, no matter what you're doing, commitment is a huge thing, because that is, it's a pact with the universe, your higher self, whatever, that um, if I'm going to do this, it's like there are sort of outside forces, I would say, that kind of are guiding you along the path, and they show up as serendipity and synchronicity. And my
Okay,
life
so
is a
would you
series
say
of
that commitment? Would you say that commitment is what you would say in your makeup? You think makes you good at doing what you do? Is that you commit to things,
times. Well,
or is it something else? I mean,
maybe some
looking at
ex-girlfriends
yourself,
can say that. What's that?
kind of from the outside looking
Yeah.
in. What would your assessment be of what makes you good at what you do?
Um, curiosity,
Hmm.
curiosity and commitment. And, I talk about the practice, and, whatever your practice is, um, my practice happens to be writing. And it's not like I do it because I have to. I started keeping a journal at 17, and I
Hmm.
probably have 65 journals of my life on paper.
Jeez.
And it's the way I sort of, I taste, process, and experience the world through the tip of my pen.
Hmm.
I think I was just like this super sensitive kid. People probably didn't realize that I was like one of the top 10 soccer players in the state of New Jersey. And, I could be a chameleon with anybody, but I was really this kind of introverted person who was having much deeper thoughts than sort of my contemporaries. And
Hmm.
I just had this thought, two things. When I was younger, I thought, um, if I want to have big things to write about, I have to have big experiences. And that has found me like buying one way tickets to India, Mexico, trying to do my own travel show in Europe. Like for me, it was, I went to volunteer at an orphanage in Tanzania. For me, it was, I knew that, there's nothing happening interesting between when I wake up in the morning and work necessarily. So I had to go out and have really big
Ma-
experiences.
Make the interesting happen. I
Exactly.
gotcha.
Yeah. And
So
call these experiences to you.
yeah, yeah. So obviously, when you do stuff like that, there's what you hope. Serendipity kicks in. You have hopes, and it doesn't always happen. So, how do you manage yourself? How do you manage unmet expectations? How do you manage disappointment? Things like that.
Well, I mean, if I had to distill my work into one thing, it would be surrender and trust. And I've seen time and time again that when some sort of disappointment happens, I'm actually
Mhm.
being protected and guided guided to something new. And
Away
it
from
might,
the way you were going. Yeah.
exactly, and it might suck in the moment, and feel all this disappointment. And when I was younger, maybe that would take me down for a month. Now, maybe like 12 hours or something. And I
Mm.
literally, I've kind of started to say, I say out loud, I'm like, all right, show me what's better. And
Yep.
I usually, something shows up in 24 hours. I mean, that's how I found my last literary agent. And another, like my whole life is kind of a series of serendipities and synchronicities. When I am in surrender, when I am in trust, when I'm in that like
Sure.
fear, it's just, like you're like, you have life in a chokehold, and you can't let new things and experiences and people come in.
Mm. That makes sense. So let me ask you this: what's a tool that you would suggest to help our listeners?
Well, my first book is A Curious Year in the Great Vivarium Experiment. And it's kind of like an Eat, Pray, Love meets Wild from a man's perspective. It was after my mom passed away. I had like a decade of sick parents. And after my mom passed away, I was like, all right, it's my time. I bought a one-way ticket to India. And I had my mom was slipping for a long time. And when she did finally pass away, I thought I was ready, but it was like somebody swept the rug out from under me. And I was kind of lost and scared. And my sister's friend was like, all right, you're a writer. I want you to do this exercise. I want you to write down 5 things you're grateful for every day and 5 things you want to create. And you're going to find that the things you create today are going to be the things you're grateful for in the future. And I was like, all right, I'll try anything. And I've been doing that since October 2010. And I can't tell you how many times what I've written down has just happened. And literally that created the whole story arc of the book. I bought a one-way ticket. I didn't have a plan, a clue. I landed in India without even like a Lonely Planet. And I was like, oh my God, I've made a huge mistake. And took me about 24 to 36 hours to sort of like shake all that off. And at one point I was like, I want to be of service while I'm traveling. And I wound up saying yes to volunteering at this eco ashram in India. And I thought I was just going to be like sweeping floors and making hospital corner beds. And it turned out this guy is India's most important environmental lawyer, like the grandfather of environmental law in India, sued the state of India over the course of 20 years to create a green zone around the Taj Mahal. Every Friday for a bunch of years, the Supreme Court had special cases for him speaking for the voiceless people of India. So, I think I'm open. Actually, I think that's a big thing. You got to be open to experiences. So
Mm.
the one thing is like a little bit of intention goes a very long way. And then the other thing I've been doing since pretty religiously, although the last couple months were a slip until about 3 weeks ago. But I've been meditating. I meditate almost every day, and I really kind of, Dr. Joe Dispenza would say like the thought sends the feeling out, the thought sends the signal out, and the feeling pulls it back in. That's kind of a very simplistic way of saying manifesting or creating. But if you think about it, everything in this dimension, like we think it's all about the physical world, but everything started with a thought. So the skyscrapers, telecommunications, space travel, it all started with the thought. So you know in meditation, I try to be very still, and I don't have any expectations. And I often get a lot of information there. It's like my higher self is kind of dictating information to me. And so I would say meditation, the gratitude intention journal, and then I do a lot of walks. And I
Mm.
just put, when I'm trying to solve a creative problem, I just put my music on. There's this like I'm in California, and there's this Native American land here, this Palm Canyon I always walk through, and I just put music on, which puts me kind of into a trance, and I ask myself the question I have to solve, and I don't go seeking the answer. And I mean, every time by the end of this walk, I have the answer because I'm just putting myself into trance. And when you go into trance, the thinking brain is shut down, and then you're just open to receiving, information.
Good stuff. So, what do you think you're most proud of in business that you've accomplished?
Well, I think I mean, first of all, just being where I am because, I grew up with lots of people who wanted to be a writer, but nobody had the kahunas to stick it out because it's a hard path.
Mhm.
But
Yes, it
um,
is.
working on Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, Becoming Supernatural, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's been translated into countless languages all over the world. And, I was just at this workshop and I met a bunch of people and they were like, that book changed my life. And then the book I just worked on with Dr. Zach Bush, I think this is going to be the most important book of the century so far on global health. And I think it should really shake things up. And this is the first book where I actually have a writing credit. So I have a with byline. So if it makes a New York Times bestseller, it'll be by Bush and Shields, which I think it should make the New York Times bestseller. But
Awesome.
yeah,
Good stuff. What would you say you're most proud of in life that you've accomplished? Similar question, but slightly
um,
different.
It's a good question. I mean, I've taken a lot of risks, and I kind of grew up probably in a fear bubble of my mother. And my
Hmm.
sister one time was like, I think you do all these things like buy one-way tickets to India, Tanzania, Mexico, like to combat this fear. And, I I make these huge leaps, and it's not without consternation or pause or something. But what I've learned time and again, and I think this goes for anybody across the board, entrepreneurs, whatever it is, relationships, when you jump, the net appears. But you come up to that edge, and it's so hard when you're looking into the abyss of the unknown and you have no idea what's next. But that's where the unknown self exists, when you jump into the unknown, because otherwise you're living in the known predictable world. And how can you expect change if you are doing the same thing every day, having the same routines, you know living a very predictable life? So, I've taken these risks with travel, and I've just somehow had the courage to follow this path. So yeah, I mean, I've
All
got,
right.
I've got
Yeah,
to
hey,
work.
that's plenty to be proud of. It's
Yeah,
probably most people would never do it.
yeah.
What one piece of advice would you give our listeners?
Um, I mean, life is too short to be wasting time, and we're at this moment in history where it's no more time to play small. It's like jump into your highest expression, into your truest self, because if you're not that person, you're not doing anybody any service. The heart actually creates this, with every pump, it creates this electromagnetic field that can sometimes be measured 3 meters out around us. And people can feel that energy. And, I don't want to get too technical, but it's just, like when you walk into a room and that person that walks in is totally lit up and you turn to face them, it's like, I believe that it's about coming into alignment with the mind, body, and spirit, or the mind, body, and our energy. So, and I believe you do that through right thinking, right feeling, right action, and right thoughts. So, I would say, if you're thinking about something, you know, my next work is about self actualization. And I talk about the soul lake, and that soul lake is this uncomfortable feeling that's, you can't, the more you ignore it, the bigger it gets. And sometimes it's scary, sometimes it's painful, but it's kind of like a spiritual GPS system. It's like, Joseph Campbell, who created the hero's journey, said, you know, something about like the cave you fear holds the answers you seek. So
Hmm.
I think you just got to move in the direction of your dreams. And when you do, I said in this new book, it's like you become like the boring machine.
Hmm.
Boring machines, the tunnel creators.
Yep,
It's like when you
I know what you
start
want.
moving in the direction of your dreams, matter conforms to your will. In other words, magic just starts happening because you're in the energy and alignment of something greater than yourself. And I think also that something um, that helps sort of that alignment is when it's in some way in service of others. I think
Sure,
there's more energy behind it when it's like, yeah, I want to do this because it makes me feel good, but it's also serving a greater good.
got it. That makes sense. I would agree with that. What one book would you recommend?
Oh wow, my God, that's a
Yeah,
tough.
now you're down to one.
Oh man, it's like I could go into so many different categories. Can I give you two?
The book, you got one book you're going to read. What's it going to be?
One book. Well, there's a book called The Tender Bar by this
Okay.
guy J.R. Moehringer, and it
Mhm.
actually became a movie produced by Clooney, and Ben Affleck played the main character. And it's just such beautiful writing. It's like this coming of age story, and it was like
Mhm.
this kid who grew up on Long Island, and he had like a deadbeat dad who would kind of show up but then disappear, and but he was this radio DJ, so the kid would always be sitting on the his front stoop, listening to the voice and everything. And he was searching for these male figures, and he wound up basically being brought up in his uncle's bar on Long Island, like this, this Irish bar or something like that, thus the Tender Bar. And he overcame all these obstacles, and he wound up going to Yale, and then he became like a New York Times reporter. And he actually, whenever I'm kind of obsessed with somebody, or an artist, a musician, whatever, I do a little research on him, and it turned out that he was the ghostwriter on Andre Agassi's book. So I
Mm.
was like, oh, well, if he's the ghostwriter, I'm going to read Agassi's book. And that was a great book. And then I just learned that he was the ghostwriter on whatever one of those princes are, Prince Harry or something like that. Not that I read it, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. Not to mention a hell of a payday, I'm sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Favorite movie of all time?
Oh man, this is another thing where I could go in different buckets, but I mean, the first one that comes to mind is The Big Lebowski.
Okay. Famous person in history you'd want to sit down and meet if you could.
Wow, these are some very unexpected questions. Um,
People want to know about the person that's talking.
that's
Get to know
true.
you a little better.
I mean, there were three people that came to mind, but I'm gonna go real outside the bounds here. Saint Germain. He was
Okay.
this ascended master, supposedly, who has appeared all throughout time, and he was especially rose to prominence during the Renaissance. And he was like, nobody knew where he came from or how he had all this money, and he could speak countless languages, and was like a virtuoso musician. There in like the British Museum, Royal Museum, there's some of his compositions and all this stuff. And um, he's he brought all of these sort of new thoughts in science and mathematics, and they called him the Count de Saint Germain. But
Mm.
people think he was like an ascended master, which kind of a time traveler who sort of moved throughout time to help humanity move forward. I'm
Sure.
surprised that word. I'm surprised that just came out of me, to be quite honest. But that's what popped into my mind.
All right, cool. Nothing wrong with that. What person from your past would you want to sit down with and have lunch with today if you could?
Oh man, my dad. My dad. He was. I call myself a martini baby. I was born 8.5 years behind my closest sibling. My dad was 51. My mom was 42, and he
Mm.
was a Purple Heart and Bronze Star World War II veteran. And
Okay.
he landed on D-Day the third day. And
Mm.
I was always trying to make this kind of emotional connection with him. I mean, I knew he loved
Mm.
me, totally committed with our family, but that generation was just kind of shut down at a certain level. And I remember
Yeah.
I wanted to take him to see Saving Private Ryan. Thank God we didn't go see that, because I don't think he could have handled seeing that. It was the first time I went to go see it by myself, and I was just, in tears, chewing all my nails. Like, I didn't understand what hedgerow fighting meant, and like what he actually went through. And it's kind of every couple of years I go through these little obsessive moments of World War II, like watching all the documentaries, reading books,
Sure.
and I guess it's kind of my way of connecting with him. But I would have liked to just. I have so many questions. I mean, luckily, and this is something I would tell your audience to do, is to interview your parents, and
Always.
record it.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
I luckily I interviewed my dad about 8 or 9 months before he passed away, and same with my mom. And at the time, my mom was kind of slipping from Parkinson's and dementia. But it's funny because that was uh, probably 20 years ago or something when I interviewed my dad, and I just listened to it um, maybe like last Easter or something. And
Mhm.
as you get older, you have this greater body of wisdom to apply to, you know,
Whatever you hear. Yeah.
what your parents are hearing. And I was like, wow, man, I wish I could have known the old man a little bit better.
Yeah. No,
But
the regrets are manyfold. When you think back to the stories and man, the questions I wish I could have asked about that
yeah,
and all
but
that
he
kind
knew
of
I
stuff.
love him. I mean, I made sure he knew I loved him, especially towards the end. So
It's what matters.
yeah.
What one piece of advice would you go back and give a younger version of you?
Well, this is actually sort of one pillar of how this new book came about. I was walking through during COVID, Dana Point Harbor, and I was listening to this song "Eyes of the World" by the Grateful Dead, which I call it a quantum string. It like collapses time to an inciting incident, and it collapses time to me being that 17-year-old kid and dreaming about, what's my life going to be? What's it going to be like to be a writer? And it was the first time I ever talked to my 17-year-old self. And I was like, well, what would I tell him? And I would tell him, chill the fuck out. Like, like life isn't unfolding. Like, enjoy it. It's,
Mm-hmm.
you don't just wake up and become a New York Times bestseller or, whatever it is you're trying to be. You have to go through all these stages. It's a
Yep.
grand unfolding, and you have to be open and aware, and you have to kind of, pivot off of these decision points. And I don't think that you can actually make a wrong decision, because every decision just branches out into a bunch of different possibilities. And I think
Sure.
eventually we're all moving into the same lessons we're supposed to you know learn in this life. So it's like, it doesn't, like, you could make the bad decisions and it might take you off course, but hopefully you're going to wake up and it's going to take you to what you're supposed to learn. Because I mean, for me, I think, this life is about, it's our spiritual journey. It's my favorite quote is by this French poet, paleontologist, Jesuit priest, who got excommunicated by the Catholic Church, which I'm like, well, he probably was doing something right. But he said, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a
Spiritual
human
beings having a human
experience.
experience. Yep.
Yeah.
I've heard that one before.
Yeah.
So Tim, where can people find you if they want to hear more about what you have to say, what you think, what you're doing? Where can they find you?
My website is therealtimshields.com. That's also my Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Um, my first book can be found there, but there's also a website, acuriousyear.com. And there's a book trailer on there, and that was filmed in India. And um, I also have a course called livethe13keys.com. So, but really, sort of the entry point to all this is therealtimshields.com.
Love it. Tim, thank you so much for coming on, bud, and sharing your experience and all that you've picked up on your journey with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great to talk to you.
It was a pleasure. All right. And to our listeners, thank you so much for hanging out with us and spending your time. I hope you had a great time listening to Tim and all that he had to say. I will remind you, as I always love to do, there is never a good excuse not to know your shit. Till next time.